So thank you all. I appreciate that you're sitting here after lunch. I think some of you just sat because you didn't want to get up, but I appreciate that you're in the room, and I appreciate that you didn't go scooting off to the other session that Pat told you about. So as Pat said, my name's Grace Beeson. I'm with Guidewire Software right now. Prior to that, I worked for Hewlett-Packard. Well, I worked for EDS, Hewlett-Packard Inc., Hewlett-Packard Enterprises, and then DXC. So if you followed that whole craziness, I was with them for about 13, 14 years, where I ran their global governance, risk, and compliance, not only for Hewlett-Packard or DXC as an enterprise, but also for all of our enterprise customers, which was about 5,000 customers in about 80 countries. What I'm going to talk about today is not only what I'm doing at Guidewire, but also what I've done in my entire career and where I've found ways to make GRC successful. I'm going to advance my slides. So a couple of things, my agenda today is I want to talk to you about a few things. We've got 30 minutes together. I'm pretty excited. We're going to go over how to build and scale a GRC program that drives financial value and operational efficiencies. It's really important. I think that people see us as this little group of GRC, and we're often this little corner, but really we need to be embedded in the whole organization. So that talks to my next part, is partnering GRC with our stakeholders. So I'm going to talk to you about integrated GRC, which I know is a buzz term in our industry, but integrated GRC for me is not only, and it is, not only how we integrate the 3 tiers of GRC, governance, risk, and compliance, but how do we integrate ourselves into our organization? And that's going to be crucial. I'm going to talk to you a bit about why that is. When we do that, we're going to look at how we can optimize risk. We're not going to reduce risk. And my previous boss and my previous mentor, still mentor, and now my business partner, and we'll talk about that tomorrow. Gavin Grounds is also here. He'll be presenting later tomorrow, actually, on quantified risk management. So a lot of what we're doing is I will talk to you a lot about how we're going to optimize and scale compliance. And we're going to lead that into how we're going to then use that into our risk model. And then ultimately, I'm going to end with how we're going to optimize, how we're going to automate GRC so that we can scale. When I do these sessions, now this one's a GRC Summit, so I'm assuming most of you are going to be GRC professionals. In fact, I'm going to stop for a minute. How many of you are in my C-suite? Not a lot of C-suite. Okay. How many? Probably not at this one, but how much IT or DBAs? So the rest of you are all in GRC? Fantastic. When I do this session, and I've done this session, ended up at a couple of different conferences, what I like to talk about, and I hope that I can resonate with the rest of you then if you're in GRC, is when we are talking to our C-suite, we need to be partnering with them because we're going to help them to show, and this model that I'm going to talk to you about of integration and automation and scale, we're going to talk about how we can create efficiencies for them. And when we create efficiencies for them, we're going to create financial value. Because ultimately, and we'll talk a little bit as we go along, ultimately, if we're not working with them, we don't disappear. I mean, you all know, right? We show up. We do our proactive assessments, or we do our proactive controls testing, or we do our audits, our third-party audits. And when we go there, if they haven't partnered with us ahead of time, we're going to find gaps. And when we find gaps that we haven't addressed proactively in the sales stream, quite frankly, we're going to cost them money at their bottom dollar. So we're going to show our C-suite how we create efficiencies that way. We're going to show our C-suite how we create efficiencies by not losing revenue on spend that we could have had diverted to something proactively because an auditor finds something, or we have an escalation, or we have an incident, or we have a risk that's actualized. When we do all of those things, we're reactive, and reactive's always going to cost us more money. With our DBAs and IT folks, how many times have you tried to do anything related to controls efficiency or proactive audit and just go, I love you, want to work with you, I don't have time. I totally get what you're trying to do. I'm going to work on that tomorrow. I've got this client thing I've got to work on today, but I'm going to work on that tomorrow. My experience with that across my entire career is and this is not specific to Guidewire, so this is just my entire career, is tomorrow becomes tomorrow becomes tomorrow. There's always something else that is going to take priority over us unless we partner with our folks, with our ITs, with our DBAs, with our SAs, with our C-suite. Unless we partner with them, they're always going to have a priority over what we need. And when they don't partner with us, we actualize our incidents, we actualize our risks. So when we can partner with them, we show them how, if we can do, and we'll talk about how I did proactive auditing and compliance testing, both at HP and now at DXC. I mean, they actually had my badge with DXC, which I thought was pretty funny. I haven't been with them for 3 years, but at Guidewire, how I did proactive audit and compliance testing, and we reduced audit fatigue because we did a test once, use many methodology. And then for compliance folks, we're going to create efficiency. I don't know the rest of you. At HP, I was very lucky. I had about 150 staff on my team. It was a massive team. Our entire organization was about, our InfoSec team was about 1,800 under Gavin. And my team was about 150. I was very lucky with that. At Guidewire, I've got about 11 staff. So I don't know about the rest of you, but my experience is that the GRC team is usually pretty small. We're not getting an open checkbook to have all kinds of staff. And even when we're looking at what do we need for headcount next year, it's really hard for me to justify why I need additional headcount. I can. We have additional audits that we're going to do. We have additional customer audits that we're going to do, or we're trying to build out a new functionality. So I can justify it, and I have, but it's really hard. My colleagues get staff a lot faster than I do. So the only way I can then scale what I'm trying to do and build my program is through some kind of automation and create an efficiency that way. Because if we're going to try to do everything manually, if we're going to try to use spreadsheets and Word documents and Confluence pages, if we're going to try to do it that way, we're not going to scale. And if we can't scale, we can't show the business impact. If I can only sample a small portion of my company, they might think that's fine. My CISO or my CTO or my CIO might think that's great. But if I can show them scale, and I can show an 80 or 90% assessment on our client base or our infrastructure base or whatever we're testing, our controls testing, then I'm going to get more value for them. Those are the things we're going to talk about. The first thing is I want to talk about integrated GRC. Now, I know it's a buzzword. Everyone talks about integrated GRC. And often when we're talking about integrated GRC, we're talking about the G, the R, and the C, governance, risk, and compliance. How do those integrate? And that's an important part of what I talk about. So making sure that we bring all those functions together. We don't have silos all over the place. Because, again, I don't know what you're facing. What I've seen, I'm very lucky I haven't seen this at Guidewire, but I have seen it in my past organizations, is we have a compliance team in our InfoSec GRC. And we've got a risk team in our InfoSec GRC. And we probably have a governance team in our InfoSec GRC, because we got the GRC. But then somewhere else, we've got another compliance team. They're going to do customer compliance, or they're going to do internal compliance. But we're already doing that. And then somewhere else, we've got a risk. Now, we may have an enterprise risk management team. And then, frankly, at Guidewire, we do have an enterprise risk management team, which is separate. But they are very embedded with us. We are very much connected with them. And they see us as a component part of that overall program. And the other thing is that sometimes you'll have a governance team somewhere else. We get the PMOs all over the place, right? When we're scattered all over the place, what happens is not only are we duplicating work, which is not efficient, and so we're stepping on each other's toes. Maybe there's hard feelings. Maybe you don't have hard feelings, but you work together. But now we are costing the company double the time because we're both doing the same thing. That's best case scenario. Worst case scenario is, okay, I acknowledge that there's another team in some other group somewhere. And I think they have coverage for, I don't know, PCI, whatever. And they think I have coverage for whatever, PCI. But neither one of us do. And now we've got a gap. That's a bigger problem. As far as I see it, that's a bigger problem. So it's not the problem of stepping on toes. You're just hurting somebody's ego that way. the problem is when you have silos, you're not creating efficiency, you're costing the company more money, you're duplicating work, you're duplicating efforts, you're causing audit fatigue because maybe you're asking your technical teams the same questions over and over again. But more importantly to me is that you're causing gaps. The other thing that we can do when I talk about integrated GRC is that's the first part, right? We're going to bring the G, the R, and the C together. So I have a picture of a three-legged stool that's broken because if you don't have all three parts together, it doesn't function. It doesn't function properly. But for me, when I talk about integrated GRC, I mean integrated within your organization. It's a story I like to tell on that. So years ago, when I was at a different company, we had one of those massive escalations where you bring everybody all together somewhere and you're gonna solution it. And we brought all our teams together, and we had our solution architects there, and we had our engineers there, and we had our PMO people there, and we had folks from all over the organization there. And in came me. And now we're offsite. We're actually be in the Netherlands, I think is where we were. And I had a colleague that I worked very regularly with and very well with, who was a security architect. And he said to me, on day two of this 5-day session where this workshop with whiteboarding and everything, we're going to come up with a solution to fix the problem that we had for a bunch of our customers, and we had this common problem. We're going to all work together. And he said to me, I love working with you. I'm so happy you're here. Is this first time in the Netherlands? I said, yes. He said, that's great. Why are you here now? Usually compliance, and I was functioning mostly on compliance at that point, and governance. So compliance, you guys come in after the fact. Usually we develop everything, and then you come sometime later and you test it to make sure we're compliant. But that's the point. You didn't bring me to the table. And so you're going to solution something, and you're going to develop something that doesn't meet all of our needs. And if it doesn't meet all of our needs, I'm coming in, and my team's coming in. We're not going to disappear, as I said earlier. We are coming in, we're going to test you. And we're going to look at your compliance. Or our auditors are going to contest you, and they're going to look at our compliance. Or our regulators and our customers are going to come in, and they're going to test you. And guess what they're going to find? They're going to find that there are things you didn't think about, because all of us have jobs we specialize in. And so my security architect, who was brilliant, by the way, I really respect him, did not always think about things the way that we think about things in GRC. And so inevitably what I would find is we'd go in and we'd do some testing, and we'd find, yeah, we didn't architect it that way. That's great. But we've got a regulatory requirement, we've got a contract requirement, we've got a corporate requirement that says we must do it this way. And so if you haven't solutioned it that way, and I've got some requirement, whatever level that is, regulatory, corporate, or customer, I'm going to make you do it. And then I'm going to hit your bottom dollar. And you're going to be upset because you're going to have some margin you were trying to hit, and I'm going to say you need to spend, $500,000 fixing that, or you're going to need to refactor it, or you're going to need to redesign it, and they don't like that. I said to this gentleman, I'll call him Mike. Wasn't his name, but I'll call him Mike. Mike, this is why I'm here now, is so that we can work together proactively to make sure that whatever you're doing, whatever this team is doing to solution this problem, you're including the things that we have to include because we've got regulatory and customer and corporate requirements. Whole new respect. And he appreciated that. And when we actually started working on it, and then we started working through the rest of the week, he really appreciated it. And at the end of the week, he said to me, I'm really glad you were here. And that was so exciting for me. The other thing that we're going to do is that when we bring all of this together, it's going to allow us to have a life cycle compliance program. So I want to talk to you about that later when we're talking about proactive compliance. But what I don't want to do is think about compliance just as a point in time. It should be from the start, then periodically throughout the life cycle, and then obviously when you're offboarding. I don't know about you. This is the other thing that gets me every day. There is such confusion in our terminology. So risk assessments, risk acceptances, exemptions, exceptions, extensions. I don't know about you, but I hear people saying, so we need an exception for whatever. And what they really mean is they need a risk acceptance. They want a risk acceptance. And what I have to remind them is that We're not going to do a de facto risk acceptance. I don't know about the rest of you, but I love we can't solve this problem. There's no technology fix, or the cost benefit on this is too high, and we're going to accept the risk. Did you do an assessment on that? I mean, do we know that that's within our risk acceptance, our tolerance, our threshold? No, we're just going to accept the risk. So one of the things that we've been really keen on doing is making sure we always have an assessment, a thorough assessment on our risk before we accept it. Exceptions. I love when people say, I need a risk exception. There's no such thing as a risk exception. You either have the risk or you don't have the risk. You have an exception to a policy that may cause a risk. And I'm gonna quote Gavin on his grounds rules, which is, I want to stop thinking about risk. And he's talk about this tomorrow, so I'm gonna steal his thunder a little bit right now. I want to stop thinking about risks as issues and start thinking about risks as consequences and outcomes. So he's going to talk more about that tomorrow when he talks about his risk quantification method. But we want to look at what is the outcome of that. And so when we're looking at our exceptions and our exemptions, we're not looking at the risk that we're accepting, or extending or exempting. It's there or it's not. One of the things we've started doing at Guidewire, this is specific to Guidewire, is we started coining this term of a risk extension. Don't love it, but it helps me in working with my IT and my DBA groups and my SA groups, because sometimes there is a gap between when we should remediate something, whatever our SLA is, our internal metrics are, and when we can remediate. But we're not going to just blanketly accept it. We're not saying we're going to accept it and walk away. We're saying, I just need a little bit more time. It's okay. But that extended time, I want somebody who owns that risk, who's financially accountable if that risk gets actualized, if the outcome happens. Who's responsible for that? I want somebody to acknowledge that they're going to say, I'm going to give it another 6 months. I know I should remediate that now. I know I should throw a bunch of staff on this right now. Not important enough to me, or I don't have enough time, or I don't have enough staff, so I've got other priorities, and therefore I will accept the risk for extending that time. So we've started coining this term of extension, and it simply just means that we're going to go beyond our SLA, and somebody recognizes that. The example I use for that is Log4j. Log4j, most companies kind of stopped everything, and everybody was dumped on go remediate the problem or the potential problem of Log4j. And a lot of companies, software companies, in fact, not saying necessarily Guidewire, but just a lot of companies, halted production or enhancements to their new product in lieu of putting that staff on fixing the remediation. That was important enough that they didn't say they're not going to accept the risk. But there are a lot of similar things that we do, and we say, or our C-suite, or our executive leadership, or our IT leaders say, we've got other priorities, and this is important, but we're going to take a little extended time on that. So we make them acknowledge. We do an assessment on that, make sure within our threshold, and then we also make them acknowledge that they own that accountability. The other thing I want to talk about there is risk owners. If you have your CISO, for example, being your risk owner for everything, that's a problem. Your CISO, and I witnessed this when I came into a couple of companies where all of the issues that were related to, this was a fun one for me, anything that was related to a policy exception that caused a risk belonged with the CISO, because the CISO owned our policy suite. Okay, well, that doesn't work because the CISO is not responsible for fixing this, and we dictate the policies or guide the policies for the entire company. So we can't own everything. We don't. We've changed that. So one of the things we looked at is who's the real risk owner. So the risk owner for us is and it's usually an executive, usually a VP or above, somebody who is financially accountable if that risk gets actualized. And an example that was given to me was the same way that my CISO can't approve travel for somebody in the CTO's office or the VP of product development. The same way that we can't approve travel, we shouldn't be then approving risk and owning the risk for it, because we don't own the financial accountability. We want to make sure that the right risk owner owns that. And when the right risk owner owns that, there's more transparency. So I've talked a little bit, I know I'm short on time today, but we talked a little bit already about partnering with our business owners. What we want to make sure is that we are a role of influence. We shouldn't be a role of control. We shouldn't be a role of dictation. If we're only driving compliance and risk management through dictation and control, well, you're not going to be effective. So you got to think sort of about the psychology around that, and how do I make it important? How do I appeal to my stakeholders? So when I work with my stakeholders, I often have multidisciplinary teams. When I started with Guidewire, for example, this is one example I will use. When I started with Guidewire, there was one person that wrote all of our policies, our security policies. And I said, well, how do you do that? Well, you know, I've been with the company for many years, and I understand our architecture, and I understand our processes, and so I write them. And then if I need input, I'll reach out to people periodically and get their input. So, but without having full stakeholder, like a multidisciplinary team, you don't know if there are downstream impacts that you're not even thinking about. And so, reluctantly, we started a steering committee. I got a little fighting on that. Oh, there's too many people. We'll never create the process. We'll never create the policies. And then that same person, I won't name him, but the same person now owns this. And I've watched them in audit meetings saying, yes, so I started the steering committee, and it's great, and it's multidisciplinary, and we get all the stakeholder buy-in. And our policies are so much more effective now because we have all the teams represented on we have a monthly meeting that we go through our policies and controls and any changes that we need to do, and we bring that all together. And so we have a team that works together on that. The other way that I partner is I use a top-down, bottom-up approach on anything, so risk management or issues management. And how I've been successful with that is, I'll say issues management, for example. Lot of metrics and stats. And by the way, if you're not using red, amber, green, go back to red, amber, green. I know a lot of our companies have changed to these wacky PowerPoints with all these fancy colors that match the color of our organization. But red, amber, green is really powerful. Our VPs, our executives, our leaders, they don't want to see red. They do not want to see that their stack, for whatever it is that you're showing, has red. And you will get action every time you see red. So one of the things I do is, and I've done this throughout my entire career, not only just with Guidewire, but also with HP and DXC, is the metrics that I'm showing are a top-down, bottom-up. So we're bringing that up to our IT executive leadership, and I'll give a more aggregated view there. But I'm also working, so if you're only working top-down or bottom-up, you're not going to be successful because the top-down is what's going to set our priorities. So I need the executives to be able to say to my more technical staff, I need you to set this as a priority. I know we've got this other thing going on. I need you to spend, half a day this week and get these things cleaned up. But equally, if I only go top down, I'm not going to get the actual action because they get distracted. They see the things, they see the charts, and they get all excited in the meeting. Maybe they get a little bit of peer pressure with their coworkers in that same room of why did Joe only have all green, but I have 50% red. And there's some pressure, and there's some pressures from their leaders, a CEO or whoever, and there's pressure to get that remediated. But if I don't get the bottom up, I'm not going to get the actual action. So we work collaboratively both directions. So I have a series of metrics that go top down to our C-suite every week. And then we've got a bottom-up approach where I have some of my staff working with the actual staff that are going to remediate any issues. And we've been hugely successful in reducing the number of open issues with that. And I was successful at HP doing the same thing. All right, so we've got about 5 minutes left. I'm going to talk about automation really quickly. But I'm going to tickle you on this because tomorrow I'm doing a joint session with Javin, and we're going to talk to you about how we actually put this in place. Automation for me is, and we are a customer of MetricStream, as Pat said, automation for me is automation within our tools and external to our tools. So automation is, how does the tool talk to itself? So we're using, so for MetricStream, we're using policy and document, IT risk, IT compliance, business continuity, and third-party risk management, vendor risk management. And how do those modules talk to each other? So this is where MetricStream and I have partnered significantly over the last few years and looking at ways that the tool already does that and ways that I want to build it more. And we've really worked really well on if I answer, or if one of my staff is filling out a form in issues management, for example, and the resolution on that issue is we're not going to fix the whole thing. Maybe we're going to work it to a certain point, and then we're going to stop and we're going to say, nothing more we can do. There's no technology fix, or we're just not going to spend the money to fix the rest of that. Well, we want to open a risk assessment. And so we've been looking at how do we create that automation that I've already filled out a bunch of fields. I don't want somebody then going off and having to change topics and go over to risk assessment and open the risk assessment and then do the risk acceptance. So if the fields are already filled out, how do we automate that? We've done that already successfully for Guidewire with our controls effectiveness. And so we do a controls effectiveness testing. If we come up with something that's not compliant, it will automatically start populating. It doesn't do the whole thing, but it'll start populating our issues management. And we're doing that with other automation. The other thing we look at is how do we then bring in automation with our other services? We've got a lot of security tools out there. There's all kinds of things testing our system. And what we had initially back when I was with Hewlett Packard is I had an infrastructure compliance team, part of my 150 staff were running infrastructure compliance testing, and we ran a tool. In fact, we ran two. We ran one that was internal and one with a vendor on about 250,000 servers every month, and that gave us data. And then what would happen is I had a manual process of control testing, and we had a swivel chair process where somebody had to go look at that report, bring the information in, and then bring it into my tool. So we created an integration with API integration of feeding that information in. I'm working that now with MetricStream. We're actually working on it with our vulnerability management and bringing that and feeding that into how it's going to look at our risk assessments and risk management process. And again, so when we create that automation, we can scale. So that manual process that I talked about before, we only got, we had 3 regions, and I would do about 25, we do sample-based, we do about 25 accounts per region, and we did some technology-based ones, so we did we had mainframe back then, so we did mainframe, and we did our environments that we had, so we had a virtual private cloud and a public cloud, and we did some based on regulatory, so we had a HIPAA and a GDPR and a PCI, but it was all manual. So when we brought that automation in, because it was already testing out our systems, we were able to scale that and bring it in on a much larger scope of what our environment looked like. And so we were able to see the level of compliance across a broader stream of environment versus having to do the swivel chair. The other thing we do with automation is you reduce human error. If you're going to do manual processes of swivel chair, you're inevitably somebody's going to code something wrong or type something wrong, and you're going to have human error. So, and then you can do continuous compliance. So rather than point in time, if you're running these scans, you bring them in, you can do that more continuously or at least in near real time. And I'm going to end, I have just a little bit over a minute, I'm going to end with, this is what it kind of looked like. So we had our GRC platform, and then we had feeds into it. So some of these were manual feeds, so you can see like in the corner here, we've got like our contract database and our crisis management. Some of that were integrations within our platform, and some of it was just manual efforts that my team would input information in. And then some of that was driven. So we had our policies feeding our controls and back and forth. So we had the controls from the regulatory environments feeding our policies, and then our policies or our regulation requirements feeding what we needed for our controls. We had different teams putting information in. And then we had automation over here, which was our external. And this is through APIs. And we would feed that information in, because these are where we were testing all our controls. So we would feed that information in, and we were able to do that on scale. Tomorrow I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about how we did all that. I think that sort of ends what I want to talk to you guys about today. I wanted to make sure that we understand that when we are looking at compliance and risk, if we're not partnering and we're not integrating, we're losing sight of the larger picture. If we're not automating, we're not going to be able to scale. So I'm going to end with one thing. Gavin always ends his presentation with, start with what you do know, build on what you could know, aspire to what you should know. And I like to start with build on something, start with something, automate something. If you can't do it all, then just start small and build on it from there. That's it. I don't think I have a lot of questions. I don't have time. I have literally 8 seconds to tell me the countdown. I'm around. If you have questions or whatever, let me know. Tomorrow I'm also presenting in the afternoon with Gavin, and I'm happy to take questions tomorrow as well. Thank you for your time.